"This piece comes from Vane House," Heath said loud enough for the neighboring tables to look over. "Maybe now you'll finally have something worth putting on the walls of that little home office you love so much." He held the wrapped frame out across the table, and Nola Fairway Caldwell, 35-year-old wife of Heath Caldwell, took it with both hands in the way a person accepts something they already know is wrong. Around them, the Aldrin Grand Hotel ballroom moved with the particular energy of a charity evening that had arranged itself to feel important, crystal on every table, white orchids in tall vases. The kind of lighting that made ordinary people look like they belonged somewhere. Ward Caldwell, 63, Heath's father, and a man who had spent 4 years name-dropping Vane House at every dinner as though the firm were a private club he'd been admitted to, began to applaud from his chair. "Now that is a gift with taste," he said, settling back with satisfaction. "That boy knows how to choose." Zara Lint, 29, Heath's interior design consultant, stood near the edge of the group with a champagne glass at her lips and a smile that didn't move. Nola removed the wrapping paper. Inside was a framed pen-and-ink architectural sketch, the kind of hand-rendered draftsmanship that Vane House had made its signature, presented behind museum glass in a brushed gold frame. A small certificate card sat tucked at the lower corner, stamped with a provenance seal. The certificate claimed it was an authenticated original from Vane House's founders' collection. Nola looked at the sketch for a long moment. The glass was right. The paper behind it was aged correctly. The rendering style was impressively close to her mother's early work. The loose, certain line that Cecile Fairway had developed through years of architectural restoration in Ohio, long before anyone outside of 3 counties had known her name. But the provenance number was wrong. Not a typo, not a clerical error. Wrong in the specific way that told Nola someone had understood the system well enough to copy its shape, but not well enough to know that Vane House had restructured its internal coding protocol in 2019. The old format had been retired. Any certificate using it after that date had not come from Vane House. She set the frame gently against the table. Heath raised his champagne glass. He looked at the room the way a man does when he's rehearsed what comes next. "While everyone's gathered," he said, "I think this is also a good time to stop pretending. Nola and I have grown in different directions. I'm formally asking for a separation." He paused. He did not look at her. "I need a partner who understands the life I'm building." Silence moved through the nearby tables in the slow, suffocating way of a party that has suddenly understood it is not a party. Ward Caldwell's expression did not change. He held his glass and watched with the approval of a man who had been consulted in advance. Zara lowered her champagne and arranged her face into something neutral, but the set of her mouth said she had already won. Nola sat completely still. She had known this was coming. She had known since the hotel charge she found 6 weeks ago on the shared household account, a room service order from the Aldrin Grand under a guest name that wasn't hers. She had known since June had placed the investigator's report on her desk without a word and stood near the door waiting. She had known since she had read the overheard conversation the investigator documented from the hotel lounge. Heath's voice, Zara's voice, the specific cruelty of Zara saying, after her birthday, she won't have anything left to argue with. What she had not prepared for, exactly, was the sound of her own heartbeat in the silence that followed his announcement. She looked at the frame, then she looked at Heath. "Before I respond," she said quietly, "I'd like to have the sketch authenticated." Heath laughed, one short sound certain of itself. "If that helps you." Ward waved a hand. "Let the poor woman have her moment," he said, and a few people at the surrounding tables gave polite, uncomfortable smiles. Nola did not look at either of them. She looked toward the far end of the ballroom, where Maxwell Grove, 57, Vane House's chief provenance and authentication specialist, had spent the evening working at the charity auction table, reviewing donated pieces for the night's bidding. His presence had been arranged 3 weeks ago. The charity committee had needed an on-site appraiser. No one had questioned it. No one had needed to. She gave him a small nod. Maxwell set down his clipboard and walked over. Nola's mother, Cecile Fairway, had spent most of her working life in a converted garage in eastern Ohio, doing restoration work that nobody celebrated and everybody needed. Old houses, mostly, the kind with original plaster walls and wood-framed windows that contractors urged owners to gut in favor of materials that looked newer, lasted half as long, and had no memory in them. Cecile had a particular understanding of what she called bone structure, the way a building expressed its age, not as deterioration, but as accumulated truth. She had never been formally credited for most of what she repaired. Her name appeared on no landmark registers. She had died of a cardiac event when Nola was 26, having never once described herself as an artist or an expert, only as someone who paid attention. Nola had built Vane House from that inheritance. Vane was Cecile's maiden name. Nola had chosen it because her mother's name deserved to outlast a garage in Ohio. Within 4 years of founding, Vane House had authenticated and restored objects for 2 museum collections and 1 embassy. Within 8 years, the firm had expanded into original design commissions and rare object provenance, the work of understanding not just whether something was beautiful, but whether it was true. By the time Nola was 34, Vane House operated through a private holding structure that kept her personal identity separate from the firm's public profile. This was not uncommon in the high-end provenance world. Many principals preferred their names attached to the work rather than the celebrity of owning it. The result was that Ward Caldwell, who spent every Thanksgiving describing Vane House's projects to his business contacts with the breathless reverence of someone who had almost met the Pope, had never connected the firm's name to his daughter-in-law's maiden name. He had introduced Nola to those same contacts as Heath's wife, pleasant, educated, worked in some kind of design consulting. He had said it warmly, which was its own particular form of erasure. Heath had known she worked with Vane House. He had never asked what that meant. The one time Nola had come close to explaining it fully, a winter evening in their 3rd year, after a good dinner when the moment had felt available. Heath had made a passing comment about how women who ran their own operations could never really let go of control at home. He had said it without looking up from his phone. She had closed the folder she was reviewing and changed the subject. She had told herself she was waiting for a better moment. She understood now that she had been waiting for something that did not exist. The first sign had not been the hotel charge. The first sign had been a comment Ward made at Easter, 2 years into the marriage, when the conversation turned to Vane House, and he said casually to a table of his old colleagues, "A firm like that doesn't need to advertise. That kind of discretion is how you know it's serious." And Heath had nodded, and Nola had looked at the tablecloth, and nobody had looked at her. But the hotel charge was what made her call June Barra, 41, her senior assistant and one of 2 people outside the firm's legal structure who knew exactly what Nola owned and what protecting it required. June had reviewed the charge and made a call. Within a week, an investigator's preliminary report was on Nola's desk. The photographs were taken in the hotel's lobby, elevator corridor, and public lounge, all observable, all legal. They showed Heath and Zara Lint with the precise clarity that photographs of that kind always achieved, without ambiguity, without room to explain. Nola had looked at the images for a long time. She had encountered Zara twice at industry events. Both times, Zara had been warm in the calculated way of someone who was studying whether you were useful. She had once touched Nola's arm and said, with apparent sincerity, "You must be so proud of everything Heath is building. It takes a certain kind of woman to hold down the home end of something that ambitious." Nola had smiled and moved toward the appetizers. The second report came 10 days before the gala. The investigator had documented a conversation from the hotel lounge. Heath and Zara at a nearby table, their voices quiet but not quiet enough. Heath had said, "She doesn't have the resources to make this complicated." Zara had said, "After the gala, she'll understand she never really fit the room." Nola had read those lines twice. Then she had called Diana Osei, 46, her attorney, the second person who understood what Nola owned and how to protect it. Diana had picked up immediately. Nola's voice was steady. "Heath is planning to announce a separation at my birthday gala. He has been in a relationship with a woman named Zara Lint. There is something else." She had pulled the household expense notification from her drawer, a charge to Soren and Vale Acquisitions, private sale, described as a framed original work, Vane House provenance included. Diana had gone quiet for a moment. Vane House's founders' collection originals are internally controlled. Who issued that certificate? That's what I need to find out. Maxwell Grove had called back within the hour. Soren and Vale had appeared in 3 provenance investigations in the previous 6 years, always through private channels, always using estate-adjacent language to make buyers comfortable enough not to look carefully at the paperwork. He could not confirm the piece was a forgery without seeing it. But the receipt alone was a flag he would not ignore. He had already been scheduled to attend the gala for the charity auction. No adjustment was necessary. Diana's last instruction arrived the morning of the event in a short message. Let him speak. Let him create witnesses. Then ask for the authentication. Nola had put her phone in her purse, looked at her mother's drafting table in the corner of the home office, the one with pencil marks from 1994 still visible on the surface. Marks Nola had never refinished because she didn't want them gone, and gotten dressed. Maxwell did not perform urgency. That was the first thing the table registered. He moved with the slowness of someone who understood that haste belonged to people who had something to prove. He set a small leather case on the table, pulled on cotton gloves, and lifted the frame into the light. Heath watched with folded arms. Ward had moved closer, curious. Zara had taken a half-step back. Maxwell examined the certificate seal first, running his thumb along the embossed edge and angling it under a small lighted loop. He entered the provenance number into a secure tablet with the careful keystrokes of a man entering evidence. Then he turned to the sketch, examining the paper's age markers at the edges, the ink composition visible under the loop, the backing material behind the glass. He looked for the internal studio mark that Vane House embedded in every authenticated original, small enough to be invisible to an untrained eye, specific enough that an imitation of it told its own story. He found the imitation. He was quiet for 30 more seconds. Then he looked up. "This piece is not an authenticated original from Vane House's Founders Collection," Maxwell said. "Even, clear, careful. The provenance certificate is not valid. The number does not correspond to any item in Vane House's authenticated archive." The silence that followed this was a different quality than the silence after Heath's announcement. That silence had been heavy and uncomfortable. This one was sharp. Heath straightened. "That's not possible. I paid for documented provenance." "The documentation was created to resemble Vane House's certification system," Maxwell said. "It is not genuine. Vane House has no record of issuing this certificate." Ward stepped to the table. His voice carried the edge of a man who expected rooms to rearrange themselves at the sound of his name. "Do you have any idea who you're addressing? My family has a long-standing relationship with Vane House." "Mr. Caldwell," Maxwell said with the patience of someone who had conducted this kind of conversation before, "I am Vane House's chief provenance specialist. 11 years. I can confirm with certainty that this certificate was not produced by our firm." Ward's mouth closed. He looked at the certificate. Then he looked at Maxwell. Then he looked at the table of guests who were not looking away. A low murmur moved through the ballroom. Diana Osei rose from her chair 2 tables away and walked toward the group without hurrying, her leather folio under one arm. Maxwell had the certificate in his gloved hand again. He was studying the provenance code format with the concentrated attention of a man who had recognized a pattern. "This coding sequence," he said slowly, "matches a format our risk division flagged earlier this year. We received lender verification requests referencing Vane House authentication certificates on high-value objects. Both certificates were forged. Both were submitted as collateral support documentation." Ward Caldwell went very still. Maxwell continued, "I cannot make a legal determination from this table, but I can say this certificate appears to belong to the same document series as those filings, and both of those filings were connected to Caldwell Properties Group." Heath turned toward his father. Ward was looking at the certificate as though it had become something else entirely. "Whose loans?" someone at the neighboring table said quietly. The question moved through the room before anyone answered it. Diana reached the group and opened her folio. "From this point forward," she said to Heath, "all communication regarding the separation, shared assets, and related matters goes through Mrs. Caldwell's counsel." She looked at him without blinking. "That is me." Heath's jaw tightened. "She doesn't need a lawyer for." "She needed one before you made the announcement in front of 60 people, Diana said. "She has one." In a private room off the main corridor, Nola sat with Diana, Maxwell and June while the ballroom thinned behind them. The frame and its certificate were already in a sealed evidence sleeve. Maxwell labeled it with time, location, and his signature, the way he always did, without commentary, with the precision of someone who understood that a single procedural gap could give a careful liar room to escape. Diana made 2 calls. The first was to Vane House's legal director. The second was to the forensic accounting firm that had already been reviewing Caldwell Properties' collateral filings. June placed a tablet on the table. The lender verification requests Maxwell had referenced were pulled up. 2 certificates, both referencing Vane House provenance numbers, both submitted to support loan extensions that had helped Ward's development company avoid a covenant breach during a difficult quarter. Nola looked at the documents. 4 months ago, through one of Vane House's supply subsidiaries, she had approved a net 90 payment extension to a contractor whose work record was clean and whose client history checked out. It had been a standard vendor arrangement, reviewed, documented, approved. She had not known at the time what pressures existed on the other side of the contractor's relationship with Caldwell Properties. "Did I help cover it up?" she asked. You approved a lawful extension based on legitimate documentation, Diana said. You didn't know what the certificates were doing. Their liability does not transfer to you. In the corridor, Heath's voice rose. Something about overreaction. Something about Nola not understanding what it cost to maintain the life she took for granted. Nola listened. She thought about a dinner 3 years ago, when Ward had described Vane House to a table of investors as the only provenance firm in this country that actually understands what serious people need, and then looked at Nola's simple blazer with the small silver pin. A bird her mother used to doodle on envelope backs, and said, with complete warmth and zero awareness, that kind of world is a bit beyond what most of us experience firsthand. Nola had touched the pin and said nothing. She thought about Heath, early in their marriage, at a party where Vane House's founder had come up in conversation. He had said he found the anonymous founder approach a bit precious, actually. Successful people should put their names on their work. She had agreed out loud and said nothing else. She had wanted him to see who she was by watching what she did. She had believed that love, given enough time and patience, would learn to ask the right questions. She understood now that she had confused patience with hope and hope with a plan. Diana slid the separation agreement across the table. The prenuptial clause holds. Infidelity clause applies. He has no claim to Vane House or any asset classified under the Fairway Trust. She paused. There is also a provision for defamation damages from the public announcement. We'll develop that as it becomes relevant. Nola signed. He'll say you arranged all of this, June said quietly. Nola looked at the evidence sleeve on the table. He gave me a forged provenance certificate at my birthday dinner. His father used the same format to support fraudulent loan collateral. I asked for an authentication from a specialist who was already scheduled to be present. She was quiet for a moment. What exactly is it he thinks I arranged? The months that followed did not arrive in dramatic gestures. The gala footage moved through the social networks that operate fastest in cities where real estate families are the closest approximation to royalty. Ward's speeches about Vane House, delivered across 4 years of charity dinners, business club meetings, and holiday tables, became the detail people remembered when the lender inquiries became public. Business contacts who had taken Ward's recommendations began reviewing their exposure to Caldwell properties. The loan officers who had accepted the forged certificates opened their own reviews, because loan officers with careers to protect understood that documented fraud required documented distance. Ward retained outside counsel before the week was out. Heath hired a second attorney when the personal guarantee provisions in the Caldwell property's credit line surfaced. The rental property Heath had moved into was flagged in the collateral review within the month. Zara Lint's name appeared in the documentation trail for Soren and Vale acquisitions. Not prominently, but enough. She had made an introduction. She had been present at the vendor meeting, where the fake piece was selected. 2 invoices from the gallery carried her consultation firm's name. She had known what she was suggesting when she pushed the piece toward Heath as a birthday gift. She had believed it would be received as an insult Nola could do nothing about, because she had looked at Nola and seen a woman who was pleasant and unimportant and posed no threat to anything. She had not known who Nola was. That was the fact Zara returned to in the weeks after her name appeared in the documents and her brand partnerships quietly suspended. She had built her professional identity on knowing rooms, who mattered in them, whose company was worth being near. She had assessed Nola Caldwell at 2 charity events and reached a conclusion that felt obvious to her at the time: nice woman, limited professional presence, Heath's wife. She had not seen the firm. She had looked at the founder and seen only the wife. 6 months after the birthday gala, Vane House announced the Cecile Vane Fellowship in Architectural Preservation. Not a product line, not a collection. An educational fellowship, fully funded, open to first-generation students pursuing degrees in historic preservation, architectural draftsmanship, or building restoration. No family legacy requirement, no institutional connection required, only the work and the willingness to learn it. The announcement event was held in Vane House's main gallery space, which had been set that evening with warm light and old photographs, not of the firm's prominent clients or landmark commissions, but of Cecile Fairway's early work. A farmhouse kitchen in eastern Ohio, its original cabinetry restored and refinished. A porch with replaced columns that matched the originals exactly in proportion and material. A window, still with its first glass, letting in the particular quality of winter light that modern replacements never quite reproduced. Nola stood at the front of the room and looked at the people who had come. She had spent years making herself small enough to fit inside a marriage that was measuring her against the wrong scale. She had hidden her name because she wanted love that didn't arrive with conditions attached to it, love that was for her, not for what she owned. She had believed that a patient, quiet person eventually received what she was owed, and she had been partly right. The patience had been necessary, but the quiet had never been what protected her. What protected her was the record, the firm's authenticated archive, Maxwell's signatures, 11 years of careful, documented, true work attached to her mother's name. Heath had given her a forgery on her birthday, presented as something real. His father had borrowed against one. Zara had suggested it with the confidence of a woman who had never once been wrong about a room. All of them had looked at Nola and arrived at the same conclusion: she could be moved without consequence. She had seemed like the kind of woman who absorbed cruelty quietly and did not push back. They had not been entirely wrong about the quiet part. But quiet, as Cecile Fairway used to say while working in a garage, that the rest of the world had no reason to notice, was not the same as empty. It was the sound a space made when the person inside it already knew everything that mattered, and was waiting for the right moment to let the record speak for itself. The fellowship's first class would be announced the following spring. The application was already open. In the prompt asking applicants to describe a space that had shaped them, Nola had written the question herself. Tell us about a place that taught you something true, not about design, about what lasts. She thought of the garage, the drafting table with pencil marks she had never refinished, the cold Ohio light through a single-pane window on a January morning, and the specific silence of a room built by someone who paid attention to what was real and asked nothing in return for the knowing. The marriage was documented and dissolved. The fraud was in evidence. The forgery was sealed. What remained was exactly what had always been there, waiting to be seen by people who knew how to look.